Hi, Daddy Longlegs here. I'd like to first of all say thank you to Bill, who's one of my customers in the US, and he is the sponsor of this series of tutorials. Thank you, Bill. I should say right at the start that this is going to be a series of lessons for absolute beginners on the Hayden Duet Concertina, and I'm not assuming any prior knowledge of the instrument or music reading in general on the part of the student. So if you're an absolute beginner, this is totally for you. Please remember that these tutorials are specific to the Elise Duet Concertina, although can be applied to the Hayden system in general. So first of all, we're going to start off with a bit of background on the concertina. The concertina is a fascinating instrument that's been around for quite a few years now, a very, very long time, hundreds of years, and there are three main types: the English, the Anglo and the duet. There have been numerous duet concertina layouts or arrangements of notes or buttons over the years, including the McCann, the Crane, the Jeffries and the Hayden, which was invented by Brian Hayden, an Englishman, in 1967. Let's talk about the duet concertina in general. One common use case for this type of concertina is to play tunes on the right hand side of the instrument and either single bass notes or chords on the left. In this way, par or pa type of accompaniments are possible, or solid blocks of sustained chords. Chords can also be arpeggiated, where the player breaks up the chord into its separate notes. We're going to get to that in later lessons, of course. What I've just said, of course, is a massive generalisation, because it's perfectly possible to play tunes that use notes on both sides of the instruments. I've also seen people who play a tune in octaves, in other words, the same tune on both sides of the concertina, an octave apart. Sometimes players will simply sustain chords as an accompaniment to singing, much like a guitarist would strum, so they don't play any tunes at all. With this type of concertina, you will hear the same note on the push and on the pull. So if I just press this button and push in and pull out, you can hear it's the same note. And that's the same as the English concertina, but different to the Anglo concertina, which will give you a different note on the pull and the push. I'm not going to go into a technical description of how the duet concertina works. However, here is a brief explanation. Inside the instrument are little strips of metal called reeds, which vibrate when air is applied to them, either on the push, which is where we close the bellows, like this, or on the pull, is when we open the bellows. The air will flow to a reed when a particular button is pressed. These reeds are tuned to the required note and vary in size according to pitch. Larger reeds produce lower notes and smaller reeds produce higher notes. Lower reeds need more effort from the player than higher notes in terms of the pressure exerted on the bellows. So if I play this note here, which is the lowest note on the instrument, I'll just use this finger here so you can see it. This is a low C, okay? You see that takes quite a lot of pressure to make it sound. Whereas the highest note on the instrument over here, this little A note here, requires very little effort to make the note sound. And we'll get back to that a bit more in the lesson. This little button up here, which is isolated from the rest on the right hand side, is called the air button, and it allows air to escape from the instrument when you push and air to enter the instrument when you pull. So in that way you're drawing air into the instrument, and sometimes that's called the draw rather than the pull. This button is no different to the others, except it's not attached to a reed and therefore makes no sound. It just provides a temporary leak, if you like, and is mainly used to open and close the bellows prior to or after playing. Several buttons can be pressed at once to provide simultaneous notes, which can give us chords. If I just show you a chord here, hopefully you can see that. Usually play chords on the left hand side, but not always. That's three different notes. Played together, that is actually a chord of F major. But we won't be playing chords in this lesson because they're quite a bit harder, obviously, than playing single notes. We can do lots of different types of chords: major, minor and seventh. But as I say, don't worry about that at the moment, we'll get to that a little bit later on. Please note the buttons of this instrument are not touch sensitive, so it makes no difference how hard or how softly you press them. I certainly wouldn't advise pressing them too hard. The changes in volume are dependent on how hard you push or pull the bellows, but the pressing of the buttons has no effect on the volume at all. So that's a bit of general background about the Duet Concertina. Let's talk specifically now about this instrument, the Elise Duet Concertina. It's made by a company called Concertina Connection Incorporated, and they're based in Valley Forge, Washington State in the US. This is an entry-level instrument or budget instrument for those people wanting to try out the Hayden system. These so-called budget instruments are over £400 or $400 if you like at the time of recording this video, so most beginners would probably be amazed to learn that a top of the range Hayden Duet Concertina would cost well over £2,000 or £3,000. Suffice to say, the concertina is not a poor person's instrument like it may have been 100 years ago. That being said, the Elise is perfectly playable and it's great value for money, and I use the Jackie, which is the English concertina variant of this instrument made by Concertina Connection, in my everyday teaching of that particular instrument. The Elise Duet Concertina has 34 buttons, 17 on each side, plus an air button on the right hand side, like I've already mentioned. A full range Hayden will have far more buttons. I've seen a layout with 67. This will obviously give you many more notes above and below the range of the Elise. Nevertheless, this instrument works on the same principle, which is both logical and musical. It's not fully chromatic as the larger duets are, so you are limited as to which keys you can play in. If it were fully chromatic, you would be able to play all the white notes and black notes on a piano keyboard. And we've got a couple of notes missing on this instrument. There's no D sharp or E flat, and there's no G sharp or A flat, but actually they're the only two notes missing. Now, if you're reading from my script here, you'll see that I've written, from this point I will write sharp as a hashtag and flat as a B, because we don't have those symbols on our computer keyboard unless we're using a special music font. The F sharp, C sharp and B flat accidental notes, as well as all the white notes of the piano provided, at least give you access to the keys of C major, A minor, G major, E minor, D major, B minor, F major and D minor. So there's quite a few keys you can play in, and if you're not familiar with the concept of keys, please don't worry about that. It's not important that you get to grips with that just yet. Let's talk about the notes provided on this instrument, that's commonly known as the range of the instrument. The two sides of the Elise provide identical notes an octave apart, so 12 notes apart. So if this is a C here on the left hand side, this is a C on the right hand side, an octave above, you see. There is a certain amount of overlap, and by that I mean this: you'll find some notes of the same pitch on both sides of the instrument. For example, on the right hand side, row 1, button 1, this note I've just played, which is a C, this is the middle C on the piano. On the left hand side, row 3, button 2, you can probably hear that's the same note. So in fact we have 7 notes that are the same on both sides of the instrument, albeit in different places. So on the left hand side we have C, D, E, F, F sharp, G, A, and those notes are repeated over here in a different place. C, D, E, F, F sharp, G, A, and those notes are the same on both sides of the instrument. And again, you might find that a bit confusing, and it's nothing to worry about at the moment. The complete range of the instrument, so how low and how high it goes, if you like, is from C on the left hand side, this note here, up to A on the right hand side, this note here, which gives us 2 octaves plus 6 more notes. The lowest C note on the left hand side, this one here, is the C below middle C on the piano. The lowest C note on the right hand side, been playing this one quite a lot, haven't I? That is middle C. And the highest note on the right hand side is the A, this one here, which is above the C, which is an octave above middle C. So if we look down on the instrument, so you know, if I'm looking down on it like this, you probably can't see that very well like that, but if I look down on one side and then the other side, we call that a bird's eye perspective, don't we? Bird's eye view. On each side of the instrument, the lowest pitched note C is in the bottom left hand corner, and the highest pitched is the third note on the row furthest away from the player. So this note here on this side, and this note here on this right hand side. In the case of the left hand, this highest note is on row 4, so I count the rows 1, 2, 3, 4. So this row here, I have a code for that. I say R4B3, so row 4, button 3. Okay, and that is a note of A, and that is the A above middle C. And then of course with the right hand side, this highest note is also on row 4, button 3, R4B3, and it is also a note of A, and this one is an octave above the highest note on the left hand side. So the A there is an octave above that A there. So what I'm trying to say to you is that on this particular duet concertina, the layout is identical left and right. In general, the notes get higher as you progress along the rows. Upwards on the left hand side, here the notes are coming up, and if I do the same thing on the right hand side but going down, you hear that the notes are getting higher in pitch. However, this order is disturbed by the presence of sharp notes on the last buttons of rows 1, 2 and 3, and a flat note at the start of row 3. Sharps and flats, if you're not sure, they're the black notes on a piano keyboard. So the F sharp note at the end of row 1, this one here and here, is actually higher pitched than the F note which is on row 2, button 1. Here that's lower, can't you? So if you wanted to run up in pitch, you'd have to go row 1, button 1, 2, 3, then go to row 2, button 1 for the F, and back to row 1, button 4 to go higher to the F sharp, then back to row 2, button 2 to go to the G. So I'll just show you that. C, D, E, F, F sharp, G, and the same thing on the left hand side, C, D, E, then over to the row 2, button 1 for the F, and then back to row 1, button 4 for the F sharp, and then back to row 2 for the G, and so on. Okay, so that's fairly straightforward. The C sharp note, which is at the end of row 2, this note here, is higher pitched than both the B flat and the C notes, which you can find on row 3, buttons 1 and 2 respectively. So also notice that the B note, which is on row 2, button 4, this one here, is higher pitched than the B flat note, which is on row 3, button 1. So if you're going to progress pitch wise, if I start from the beginning of row number 2, I've got F, G, A, then I've got B flat at the beginning of row 3, then I come back to button 4 for the B, then I'm going to go to row 3, button 2 for the C, and then back to row 2, button 5 for the C sharp, and then back to row 3, button 3 for the D. So you can see that chops and changes a lot, doesn't it? Look. Got to go backwards and forwards from row 3 to row 4 to get it to run up in pitch. Again, it's a bit confusing, I know, and it's really nothing to worry about at the moment. I just wanted you to be aware that it just doesn't run up one button at a time. There are some changes to make, and this applies to both sides. And like I say, it's not vital that you memorise this at the moment. Just be aware of it. Right, so a lot of chat there, sort of general stuff, but I think it's important to know that. Let's start to play the thing, shall we? So I'm sitting on an upright chair. It hasn't got any arms. It has got arms, but I've got them pushed up. You don't want anything getting in the way of your arms. And my feet are on the floor. You don't want to have your feet floating. You don't want to be cross-legged. You know, sit comfortably, sit upright. If you want to sit back in your chair a little bit and be comfortable, that's absolutely fine. But don't sort of slop about in an armchair. That's not a great idea. Now, keep the bellows away from clothing that's going to rub and damage them, so you don't have the bellows across your trousers if you're a man, or your skirt if you're a lady. What I do is I have the right end of my concertina on my right leg. Hopefully you can see that in that shot. And then the left side of the concertina is floating free, okay? But don't have it across your clothes, because your clothes will rub on the bellows, which are probably made of cardboard, and they're going to wear out very quickly. As I say, my preferred leg for resting the concertina on is my right leg, but yours might be your left leg. Doesn't matter, whatever feels comfortable to you. Make sure the instrument is the right way round, and if it is, that isolated air button up here will be on the right hand side and can be easily reached, like I'm doing there, with the side of your right hand thumb. The straps should be at the back of the instrument, so if I can just show that, hopefully you can see that. Okay, so nearest to the player. And the small thumb screws, these things here on both sides, will be on top. These thumb screws can be undone, and you can change the strap by moving a few holes backwards and forwards until you find that the tension of the straps are right for you. Now obviously they don't want to be too tight or too loose, so you can see my hands go through pretty comfortably, but there is a bit of play. Notice how the fingers go through and the thumbs go on top. See, like that. Don't be too far forward or too far back. Now, I've got very, very long fingers, so I'm not a very good yardstick to measure this by. You've got to make sure that all your fingers can reach all the buttons, and you curl your fingertips over, so make sure you can reach those buttons on row 4, and you curl your fingers over so the fingertips play the buttons. Don't try and play flat fingered like this, always curled. You may need to move backwards and forwards a little bit, but generally your right hand and your left hand will stay where they are once you've got them settled. Make sure you keep your fingernails short, like this, because if they're long, you're not going to be able to accurately play the buttons, and you'll get a nasty sort of clacky sound as those fingernails hit the buttons. It wants to be the soft pads of your fingers that press down on the buttons. It's very important to get comfortable before you play, so don't be impatient with this. Make sure the straps are right for you, make sure you're sitting comfortably before you even think about playing a note. Before you start to play your first tune, open the bellows slightly. Now that's obviously closed like that, and obviously that is starting to open. Use the air button to do this. Just place a bit of pressure against the right hand and pull out. And don't pull out too far, but just something like that. Show you that in both hands. Something like that is fine. It's not a good idea to start off from having the bellows completely open like this, as open as you can get them, or completely closed up. And don't try and close and open them unless you're either operating the air button or a note button, because you may cause damage. I tend to keep my instrument fairly horizontal, although I have seen players sort of curl the thing round, and maybe that's for effect, but I was always taught that it's not a good idea to do that. I tend to play sort of fairly square, but I'm not saying that's right, it's just what works for me. Right, our first tune is the dreaded Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And I hear you ask, why? Well, everyone knows this tune, so it is a really good one to start with. It's a very tidy tune to learn, and it will teach us an awful lot about the instrument, and ultimately we'll play the tune and we're going to play a little bass line to go with it, but that'll probably be in the next lesson. Bit of bad news, I'm using musical notation to teach this instrument. I do have tablature for some of my instruments, but for the duet I use standard musical notation because we need both clefs, the treble clef and the bass clef. And if you don't understand that concept, again, don't worry, I'm going to be teaching you to read music alongside teaching you how to play the instrument. Remember, music is quite simply a series of sounds and silences played across time, and it's represented as notes on staves, and those staves are the banks of 5 lines, which we read left to right, top to bottom, like words on a page of writing. Now, some teachers will tell you otherwise. I'm going to say learn to play the right hand tune first before you start adding the bass. Now a lot of people say no, learn both hands at the same time, but I actually think if you're a beginner that's too difficult. So I'm going to show you today how to play the tune of Twinkle, Twinkle Little Star on the right hand side and making sure that you do it properly. So we're going to play the right hand tune first. And as I say, don't worry about the left hand bass accompaniment until you are confident with the tune. Now this tune uses the first 6 notes of the scale of C major. C, D, E, F, G and A. You need to get comfortable with these notes first and know how to finger them. I'm going to show you those notes now. I'm not going to talk about sheet music just at the moment. I'm just going to show you where the notes are on the instrument. So we're on the right hand side over here, okay? And C, like I've said several times, it's this note, which is kind of nearest to you in this corner. Use your index finger on that, and from that position of having the bellows slightly open, press down on that button and pull out a little bit, and you'll hear that note, and that is C. It's actually middle C on the piano, the same as middle C on the piano. Now go to the next button down on the same row. Don't use the same finger, use finger number 2. Keep pulling. That's the note D. Okay, now go to the button below that and use your 3rd finger, and that's E. Now I've pulled my bellows out quite a bit, so I'm going to play those 3 notes again, but I'm going to push in as I play them. So C, D and E. Now notice as I'm playing them, pushing the button down and keeping it down. I'm not going like that. I'm sustaining the note, we call it. So C, D, E. So this is all on row 1, button 2, button 3. Finger 1, finger 2, finger 3. So the finger is the same as the button number. It won't always be that way, but it is here, which is one of the reasons I teach this tune first. So C, D and E, all next door neighbours. Okay. Now the other 3 notes we're going to need are the 3 buttons on row 2 in the same place. So button 1 is F, button 2 is G, and button 3 is A. So on row 2, button 1 is F, button 2 is G, and button 3 is A. So if I just run up through those 6 notes, I'm going to play buttons 1, 2 and 3 on row 1 with fingers 1, 2 and 3, and then I'm going to play buttons 1, 2 and 3 on row 2 with fingers 1, 2 and 3. I'm going to pull out as I play the 3 notes on row 1. I'm going to push back in as I play the 3 notes on row 2. So there's our start position with the bellows. I'm going to be pulling to start with, so C, D, E. Now my bellows have opened out slightly. Now I'm going to go to row 2 and play buttons 1, 2 and 3, and I'm going to push the bellows back towards the closed position. And these are the notes F, G and A. So F, G and A. So put that together. C, D, E, F, G, A. So row 1, buttons 1, 2 and 3, pulling. Row 2, buttons 1, 2 and 3, pushing. And don't forget that button 1 must be finger 1. Don't be tempted to use one finger for all the buttons. It's not a good idea. Train yourself to do things properly in this simple tune to start with, and you'll always do it properly from that point on. And you can hear that I'm running up through a major scale. In this case it's a major scale of C. If you like, it's the Do, Re, Mi, Fa. Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La. Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, if you like. So, and then pull out again as you go down through the notes. And push there. So it'll be pull, push, and then pull, push. Or you could just go straight up and down. Something like that is fine. Just get used to where those 6 notes are on the instrument, because those are the only 6 notes you need to play Twinkle, Twinkle Little Star. Let's look at our music. Now you can see you've got 2 banks of 5 lines. Those are called staves. Got one on top which has this curly sign. I'll come back to that in a moment. The notes are written there. C, C, G, G, A, G. The notes don't come in the same order as I was just playing. I was simply playing all the notes you find in the tune. Here we jump around a little bit, don't we? So on the music, every note is expressed in this tune anyway as a head and a stem. Okay, the first note is called C. The name of the note is C. It's written directly underneath the note, and a code underneath that, R1B1, row 1, button 1, which is my code. That's peculiar to my music. You can see part of the word twinkle written underneath that, twin, so you know where you are in terms of the song. So the first 2 notes are both C, as your twinkle, and you'll notice that the 2 notes have got a number 1 to the left of them, indicating that you're using index finger on that note. So there's a lot of information. We'll come back to why the note is where it is in a moment. Just for the moment, we're just getting used to reading it on the stave there. Notice there's nothing on the lower stave. Okay, those 5 lines are empty because they're going to house our left-hand bass accompaniment later on. Probably that will be in our next lesson. So I put the words in to help you. Also, I need to mention that in the UK we talk about bars of music, but in America I think people generally use the word measure. So on this first stave we have 2 measures or 2 bars of music. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. That's 2 bars of music. So in this tune you count 4 beats in each bar or measure. There are 12 bars in the entire tune. All bars are equal. That's to say they all last for the same amount of time, regardless of how many notes are played in each. This is shown at the start of the first bar by that 4-4. This is called the time signature. Now don't worry about the fact that there are 2 number 4s. Just look at the 4 on top and think, right, I'm going to be counting in 4s, and that's all you need to understand at this point. I'll explain all this a bit later on. I don't want to make things too complicated today. So this 4-4 at the beginning is called the time signature. So that's the time signature. Every tune has one, and every tune has a key signature. The key signature of this tune is C major. With the key of C major, the key signature is actually invisible. You can't see any sharps or flats at all at the beginning of the stave, and that's how we know we're in the key of C major. It could be A minor, just to be technically correct, but trust me when I say it isn't, it's C major, this one. And what that means is you probably won't play any sharps or flats at this level, and it's certainly true for Twinkle, Twinkle Little Star. There are no sharps or flats, no black notes if you like, in this tune. Now of course the term black notes doesn't make any sense because all the buttons are white, aren't they? But some of them actually do represent black notes on the piano keyboard. You know, I've mentioned F sharp and C sharp and B flat, so you know, just bear that in mind, but not in this tune. If you look at the first bar, Twinkle Twinkle, those 4 notes are all crotchets. They've all got stems, they've all got kind of oval shaped heads at the bottom end of those stems, and those heads are filled in black crotchets, 1 beat notes. And in the next bar, the second bar, you've got 2 more crotchets, and then you've got a note that looks like a crotchet but the head isn't filled in, and that's called a minim, and that is worth 2 beats. So when we talk about 1 beat and 2 beat notes, this is what is meant by the value of a note, how long it lasts. So crotchets last for 1 beat and minims last for 2 beats. So a minim lasts for twice the length of a crotchet. So in bar 1 you've got 4 crotchets, so these are simply played on each beat of the bar, and each note lasts for 1 beat. So you press the appropriate button down and keep it held for the correct length of time, but giving yourself time to lift off and play the next note. In this tune this will either be for 1 beat in the case of a crotchet, or 2 beats in the case of a minim. In reality, you rarely give a note its full value. You need to sort of shave a little bit of time off to get to the next note. So in that first bar we've got C, C, G, G. We know that C is row 1, button 1, R1, B1, and G is row 2, button 2, R2, B2. Sounds like something out of Star Wars. And it's finger 2, so it's this note here. So we're going to go from these two C's, we'll be pulling, so we're going to play 2 C's, there, and then 2 G's, there. Notice finger 1 and then finger 2. So let's just play that first bar or measure. Okay, twinkle, twinkle. In bar 2, little star, we're going to the note A, which is row 2, button 3, R2, B3, finger 3. You'll see the little number 3 next to the head of the note. We've got 2 of these played as crotchets. And then the final note in this stave is back to G, but notice it looks different because it's not a crotchet, it's a minim. So it's row 2, button 2, and it comes in on beat 3, and it's held for the whole of beat 3 and the whole of beat 4. And all of that was on the pull. Let's just close the bellows up to our start position and play those 2 bars. Here we go. Now, it's harder than it looks. It might sound very easy, it might look very easy, but you've got to play it evenly. You've got to hold the buttons down for the correct length. And the way I would count it, I would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. Please notice there is a symmetry to this tune. The entire tune is made up of alternating bars of 4 crotchets, followed by bars of 2 crotchets and a minim. So in that first stave, those first 2 bars, you've got crotchet, 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 minim. I've been talking about the stave. The stave is the 5 lines that we draw the notes on. Okay, and there are 2 staves glued together. We've got the top one, which carries the tune in this case, and the bottom one, which will carry our bass. In the UK, we call this the stave. In America, in the US and Canada, I think, it's referred to as a staff. Okay? Both are correct, but I tend to use the word stave because I'm English. So when I say stave, if you're in America, think staff. So we've been playing notes on our first stave. Okay? That was Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Let's go to bars 3 and 4. You'll notice there's a number 3 above bar 3, so you know where you are. Actually, what we'll do, we'll play up to there again so our bellows are in the right position. So let's get our bellows to the start position with the bellows pulled out very slightly. Just play that first stave. So that's where our bellows are now, quite pulled out, aren't they? So from bar 3 we're going to be pushing. You can see the push written on top. We're going to play 2 Fs, 2 Es, 2 Ds and a C. Let's just play that. Now notice I'm pretty much closed up, so that's a warning message to me, and that's warning me that I perhaps should start with the bellows a bit further apart than I had them, because I nearly closed up then. So the pitch of the note, how high or how low it sounds, is dictated by the position of the head of the note on the stave or staff, the 5 lines. Think of these lines as shells for putting your notes on. The higher the head of the note appears on the stave, the higher its pitch will be. So the C note at the beginning is lower pitched than the G note, which is lower pitched than the A note. So C, C, G, G, A, they're getting progressively higher. Then you come down to G, down to F, down to E, down to D, down to C. Don't look at the stems, the sticks if you like, look at the heads of the notes to get the pitch. Notice that the heads of the notes are either written on the lines or in between the lines, and that's what we call spaces. Now the first note of the tune, which is middle C, is a special case, as it's written on a little extra mini line underneath the stave called a ledger line. In music you can have several ledger lines above and below the staves to house notes that are too high or too low to fit on them. And obviously the tune, right hand notes, is written on the upper stave, which has a special sign, I mentioned this earlier, at the beginning called the treble clef or G clef. Now you can see over here that the first curl of the sign is actually on that second line up, and that fixes that note that falls on that line as G, and that's why this clef is sometimes called the G clef, treble clef or G clef. And down here, this bass clef, the two little dots go either side of the fourth line up, fixing that note at F, and that's why this is called the F clef. But don't worry about that, we're not going to be using that stave, that clef today. The clef we're using today is the treble clef or G clef, just so you know. The two staves are joined together with this huge bracket on the left. Because they're joined together, we can see how the notes of the two hands coincide and relate to each other from a point of view of timing, and you won't see this until we get to bar 13, where we start to play the tune and the bass line. So I've said you pull the bellows out while you're playing the first two bars, and you push in again as you play the next two bars. So bars 3 and 4 are F, F, E, E, D, D, C. So let's just look at these notes in more detail. I've said that the C is on the ledge line underneath the stave, the G is on the second line of the stave, the A is drawn in the space above the second and third lines. When we go down to the second stave, we have F, which is on the first space, and then we have the E, which is on the first line, and then we have the D, which is tucked in underneath the first stave in that space there before we return to that middle C on that ledger line. So we're pulling to play the first two bars, pushing to play the third and fourth bars. I'm going to pull my bellows out a bit further than I did. I'm going to play those first 4 bars. Here we go. Right, so that's our starting position. I think that will work pretty well. Here are our first 4 bars. I won't talk over this so you can hear the music and you can see my fingers on the buttons. You'll only see me playing on this side. This side I'll just be pulling the strap, pulling against the strap to help open the bellows, and you'll see me pushing as I close up in bars 3 and 4. So here we go. So a reminder, make sure you use finger 1, button 1, finger 2, button 2, finger 3, button 3. In this tune, that won't always be the case, but it is here. So we've successfully played our first 4 bars. So if you've done that, well done. Let's move on to our next section, which is obviously the up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. When you're playing, there's no need to wrench on the bellows at all. It's all got to be gentle and smooth. You've obviously got to exert some pressure on the bellows, whether pulling or pushing. If you start wrenching at the bellows, you're going to hurt yourself if you do that, so it's not a good idea. And have regular breaks if you're getting a bit tired. I've been talking for a very long time here. Maybe turn this off, go and get a coffee or a tea, come back and have another go. We'll talk about practicing a bit later on. Now notice bars 7 and 8 are the same as bars 5 and 6. So up above the world so high and like a diamond in the sky, same tune. So you've only got to learn bars 5 and 6, and you've got 7 and 8 as well. What's happening here is you're descending from G to F to E to D. Okay, now notice how these 3 buttons at the start of row 2 are staggered from these 3 buttons at the start of row 1. They're not directly in front, they're up a bit, aren't they? There's a reason for this, and it's all about making chord shapes, and we'll talk about that in another lesson. But notice they're not directly in front, they are staggered. So what have we got? We've got G, R2, B2, row 2, button 2, F, row 2, button 1, E, row 1, button 3, D, row 1, button 2. So finger 2, finger 2, finger 1, finger 1, finger 3, finger 3, finger 2. And it's crotchet, 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 minim, as it is all the way through the tune. A bar of 4 crotchets and then a bar of 2 crotchets and a minim. So at this point we're pulling, so our bellows are probably closed up a bit. So let's play these 4 bars. Remember, it's only really 2 bars played twice, isn't it? So I'll be pulling for Up Above the World So High, pushing for Like a Diamond in the Sky. So here we go. And a reminder that the G is button 2, so it's finger 2. The F is button 1, so it's finger 1. The E is button 3, so it's finger 3. The D is button 2, so it's finger 2. Okay, so those 4 bars are now complete. Pretty straightforward, but don't underestimate this. Don't feel bad if you're an absolute beginner and you're struggling with this. No matter how good a musician you are, you know, if you've never played one of these things before, it is a bit of a shock. It was to me when I first started playing squeeze box instruments after a lifetime of playing the guitar. I found it really tricky. Right, more good news, because our last bit, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, How I Wonder What You Are, bars 9 to 12, they're the same as bars 1 to 4. So we basically learnt the whole thing now. So lots of repeats. In fact, there are only 6 unique bars in the whole tune. Talking about practice, practice regularly, but not for too long at a time. Try playing more when you're really enjoying yourself and less when you're not. Don't make practice sessions a chore that you feel has to be done, like the washing up or the hoovering. Don't worry if you don't get to play the instrument every day. Don't make it a tedious thing practicing. Maybe practice quite a long while when you're really into it and not so much when you're not, is the message. The other thing is, play as slowly as you need to. Don't rush certain parts that you find easy and slow down on the harder bits. Play the whole tune at one even pace. Don't forget, you can always speed up later on. There's no shame in playing really, really slowly at first, as long as the whole tune is really slow. So when you feel that you can play this tune fluently, then it's time to move on to the next lesson, where I'll show you how to add the bass. So I'm going to end this tutorial by playing the piece all the way through. I'll count it in, and when you feel able to, please play along with me. Get the start position with the bellows, pull them out a little way like that, maybe a bit more than I did at the beginning of the tutorial. You'll soon know if it's wrong, because when you get to the end of bar 2, if you run out of bellows to play the notes, then you'll know you've pulled them out too far to start with. These instruments don't have a fantastic amount of capacity in the bellows, so it's easy to open them out too far and to close them up, so you have to be very judicious about the use of the bellows and the pulling and the pushing. Now I've got my music printed out, you can see it here in the camera. I find it's easier to look at the printed sheet than it is to look at the music on the iPad or your computer. So here we go, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, just the tune. I will count you in with a nice clear 1, 2, 3, 4. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. One, 2, 3, 4. Just a quick word before we finish about minims, the last note of each stave, if you like. Be very careful that while that note is ringing, while it's still sustaining, that you keep pulling or pushing, whatever the case may be, on the bellows. I'll show you what I mean. I won't do that this time and you'll hear the mistake. Okay, so here's the first stave. See how I stopped the note because I didn't keep pulling on the bellows. If you don't keep pulling or pushing, the note will die. Now I'm going to keep pulling on that word star, on that note of G. You'll hear that the note will carry on for the full 2 beats. See, I'll do the same here. See, how I wonder what you are. Now I'll do it incorrectly. I'll stop pushing on that last word. Okay, so I'm pushing in, bar 3. See, I played the note really as a crotchet, and that's not what we want. We want the note, that minim, that note where the head isn't filled in, to last for the 2 beats. I'm sure you're getting the idea. Now, these lessons are very dumbed down, so I apologise if they're coming across a bit too childlike, but having taught in junior schools for over 40 years, I've got in the habit of dumbing things down, and I've learnt that's not a bad idea for both children and adults. I hope you found today's lesson enjoyable, and you'll see me in the next lesson when we start to add the bass to Twinkle, Twinkle Little Star. Thank you very much for watching, and I really hope you enjoy playing this tune.